Today is Friday, January 20th, and this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. One of my favorite passages in all of sacred scripture is the very first psalm, Psalm 1. If you don't know the content of Psalm 1, I encourage you to take a minute, pause this talk, and read it a few times. The very first psalm in the book of Psalms. I like the first psalm because I think it provides us with the key to the Christian life, to understanding how the Christian life works, and it's fitting that it's the beginning of the book of Psalms, which provide the devotional content of the Christian life. When we talk about the divine office or the liturgy of the hours, when you think about the daily devotional life of the priests and monks and nuns, along with many laymen and women throughout the world, they're all focused on the book of Psalms. And therefore it's no surprise that the very first psalm is so significant and helpful. And as I said, I think it's really the key to understanding how the Christian life works. And I encourage you to read it and memorize it, because the more you think on it in light of your continuing experience as a Christian, I think you'll find it more and more helpful the more you go. The very first psalm. I don't have this psalm memorized in detail, though I know it pretty well, but it begins by saying, blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the ungodly, who does not stand in the way of sinners, nor sit in the seat of the scornful. Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stand in the way of sinners, nor sit in the seat of the scornful. So we begin by reading what the blessed man is not. He's not a worldly man. He's not a man who listens to the opinions and judgments of the ungodly. He's not a man who is found walking in the same way as unbelievers. He's not found surrounded by unbelievers, living the same life they are. And he's not sitting in the seat of the scornful, arrogant critics. The blessed man isn't a worldly, arrogant man. He doesn't get his information from unbelievers. He doesn't listen to their counsel. He doesn't imitate their ways. He doesn't seek the things that they're seeking. The blessed man is different. He's different from unbelievers. He does not do what they do. But it goes on to tell us positively what he does. So he doesn't simply object to worldly things. He also has a positive identity, a positive habit. It says that he does not follow the counsel of the ungodly. He does not stand in the way of sinners. He does not sit in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord. His delight is in the law of the Lord. And on his law he meditates day and night. On his law he meditates day and night. His delight is in the law of the Lord. He loves reading the scriptures. He takes pleasure in reading the scriptures. They're his constant meditation, day and night. He's always thinking about God's law. He takes delight in God's law. He meditates on it day and night. This is the positive practice, the positive habit of the blessed man. He doesn't merely find fault with the way of the ungodly. He doesn't merely say no to everything, but he positively does something good. And it's his delight. He doesn't need anyone to motivate him to do it. He doesn't need anyone to tell him to do it, to admonish him to do it. It's his delight. If you tell such a man, you can have today off to do anything you please, he'll go and study the scriptures and meditate on God's law, because that is his delight. And so we can hold ourselves up to this description and ask ourselves whether we resemble this blessed man in both what we don't do and also in what we do. Do we resemble this blessed man? Does this description of this blessed man describe us? It's easy to find people who complain about the way of the ungodly, but they just complain about everything. It's like parents who say no to everything. They don't let their children do anything. It's no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. But then there's no positive practice. There's no positive religion. There's no real wisdom. It's just a constant abstaining from other people's ways. And that's not true religion. That's only half of true religion, and therefore it's false religion. And on the other hand, we find people who talk about reading Christian books and going to masses or watching Christian films and so on, and yet they walk in the counsel of the ungodly. They stand in the way of sinners. They sit in the seat of the scornful. They practice half of the religion, which makes it again a false religion. The blessed man practices both. He does not walk in the way of the ungodly, and he positively practices true virtue, true religion. So we have to examine ourselves in light of this description in Psalm 1 and make it our goal to become this man, to have this description be true of us as we continue to amend our lives as Christians. The psalm goes on to explain to us what the benefits are that are enjoyed by this godly man. And again, this is why I believe that Psalm 1 reveals to us the key to the Christian life. And I think it's surprising to think about. We're told that his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. And then we read, he shall be like a tree planted beside the streams of running water. His leaf will not wither. He will produce his fruit in due season. Everything that he does shall prosper. He shall be like a tree planted beside streams of water. His leaf shall not wither. This, I believe, is really the key to understanding the nature of the Christian life. The blessed man, the godly man, is praised because his leaf will not wither. He shall bear fruit in due time, and all that he does will prosper. Now remember, you've got to qualify all of these things. For example, when we say all that he does shall prosper, we don't turn around and forget what we just read, that this is a man whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. This is not a man running after worldly ambitions or carnal desires. This isn't a man running after material things in the world. We just got done saying he doesn't walk in the counsel of the ungodly. He doesn't stand in the way of sinners. He doesn't sit with the scornful. His delight is in the law of the Lord. On his law he meditates day and night. So we have to think, what would the pursuits of such a man be? What would the works and projects and mission of such a man be? It wouldn't be worldly things. We were just told that. It would be virtuous, godly things that he pursued in life. And we're told that all that he does shall prosper. Those virtuous ambitions that he pursues, he will fulfill them. He'll prosper as he lives according to the law of the Lord. So remember that all of these things are qualified by what we've already read. All that he does, this God-fearing, obedient man, all that he does will be prosperous and successful. His leaf shall not wither, and he shall bring forth his fruit in due season. And I want to really focus on these passages here because I think they reveal the nature of the Christian life. What we see is that it's assumed in this passage that the conditions in which this man lives are going to be difficult. The conditions are going to be difficult. He's praised because his leaf shall not wither. Well, what causes the leaf of a tree to wither? What causes the leaf of a tree to wither is extreme heat or a lack of rain, a lack of water. This man is going to live and pursue this devout ambition in the presence of adverse circumstances. He's going to pursue these things in the presence of circumstances that would naturally cause his leaf to wither, as it were, that would cause him to bear no fruit. the conditions in which he lives should cause him to die and be fruitless. Everything that he does appears as if it should fail because of the circumstances in which he lives. Everything is against him. Everything is hard. His leaf shall wither, and he shall bear no fruit. And yet, in spite of these conditions, we find that this man does not see his leaf wither and does not see his fruit fail to be born. He does produce, he does bear fruit in due season. And he does so in the presence of adverse conditions. Otherwise, it would make no sense to say, oh, he's so great, his leaf does not wither. No trees have their leaves wither when the weather is good. All trees bear their fruit in due season when the conditions are favorable. What's unique about this man is that his leaf does not wither when the conditions would naturally cause the leaves of a tree to wither, and he bears his fruit at a time and in circumstances when other trees will not bear their fruit. And there's a reason why he's able to do this. It's because he is planted beside streams of living water. His location, his situation, as it were, is what makes him different than the other trees. He is planted beside the rivers of water. I don't know if you've seen a riverbank where trees stand beside the water, but their roots grow alongside the riverbank, and they sort of wind around beside the water and into the water. And you can see these giant trees with their roots just always immersed in the water of the streams. And when these trees are so situated, it doesn't matter if the circumstances that they live in become unfavorable, because their supply of water remains constant. And they continue to thrive, they continue to grow, they continue to bear their fruit even when conditions are not ideal. Whereas trees that are further from the water are the first to wither and die. This tree, this blessed man, is like a tree planted beside the stream of water. And what's the significance of that image? Well, it just was described for us in the previous verses. His delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. This man is like a tree that's planted in the presence of an endless source of good things, an endless source of nutriment, of strength, of life. He's always in the presence of this virtue that's symbolized by the waters of the river, because his mind and soul are immersed in the counsel of God in the Scriptures, in the law of the Lord. He always has this light, he always has this sound wisdom, this good counsel. His soul is soaked in this true wisdom, this wisdom from above, as St. James describes it. And because his roots, as it were, are immersed in this never-ending source of virtue and wisdom, even in the presence of adverse conditions, he continues to prosper and bear fruit. In other words, he perseveres. He perseveres through difficult conditions, through adverse circumstances. He perseveres. And we read at the end there, all that he does shall prosper. All that he does shall prosper. And what is it that allows him to prosper? It's the virtue of perseverance. The virtue of perseverance. The ability to endure and weather the adverse circumstances that take out all the others. The virtue that brings him to succeed is perseverance. So let's keep that in mind for a minute. Imagine this strong, deeply rooted, well-watered, persevering tree that just continues to thrive even when conditions are unfavorable. The psalm goes on to say, the wicked, on the other hand, they are not like this rooted, watered, persevering, fruit-bearing tree, but they are like chaff, which the wind drives away. They are like chaff, which the wind drives away. And just to be clear, if you're not certain what chaff is, on the farms, and again, I live in a rural area, so this is very vivid for me. Out in the country where wheat is grown, the wheat is planted in the fall when it's cool, usually in September or October. It's planted in the fall and it grows up a few inches, looks just like green grass in the fields. And then it stops growing as the winter moves in. And it lays dormant there, a few inches tall of the greenest grass, it appears. And then when spring arrives, it begins to grow. And as we get into summer, that grass grows up into the finished wheat heads, and the wheat berries form. If you've ever seen the head of a wheat plant with the whiskers on it, those wheat berries form, and then as the weather begins to get hotter and drier as the summer approaches, the plant dries up and turns into sort of a golden brown color. It even looks white sometimes. And it dries out until it's as dry as paper. And then when it's time to harvest, in our generation, the combines, the machines, the harvesting machines go out and they cut the wheat down like grass, but the machines separate the berries in the head of the wheat from all of the dried out, dead body of this plant. And then the combine machine blows air through all of this stuff. The heavier, denser wheat berries fall to the bottom in the combine, and all of the dead, paper-like chaff is blown out into the field and left behind. So the wheat is separated from the chaff. The chaff is just the dead, dry, papery remnants of the wheat plant. In the ancient world, before machines like the combines were available, they simply used to cut the wheat by hand, tie it into sheaves, which were like bundles of wheat, They would carry the wheat, all of the sheaves, back to a place where they would process them, and then they would do this work of separating the berries from the chaff. They would do it manually. They would throw all of these wheat plants with the berries in them onto a pile, usually on some kind of stone or concrete, and they would literally beat the wheat with wooden sticks that would break it all up and knock all the berry seeds out. So once all the berry seeds were loose, all of this was just laying in a big giant heap on the threshing floor, it was called. And then they would take rakes that were called winnowing fans, and they would scoop up piles of this busted up, dried out wheat, and they would throw it high into the air, and the breeze or the wind would blow all the light, dry, dead, papery material away, and the heavier wheat berries would fall back to the threshing floor. So all the chaff would be blown away by the wind, and the berries would remain. And again, we have an image there in the wheat berries. We have an image of this perseverance. The adverse conditions come, they blow away the chaff, but these berries remain. The psalm says the wicked are like the chaff. The wicked are like the chaff which the wind drives away. And again, the wind signifies this idea of adverse conditions, of trials and difficulties and problems. The wicked are like the chaff which the wind drives away. So as we think about this psalm, what is the image or the message that it teaches us? It teaches us that God's people prosper and win in the end by persevering through difficult circumstances. God's people win. All that they do prospers. They win simply because they endure to the end. And that should sound familiar because Jesus said, "Whoever endures to the end shall be saved." It's perseverance that marks the godly person. It's perseverance. It's not gentle conditions. It's not prosperous circumstances. It's not ideal fortune always being enjoyed. It's simply the fact that the godly people are able to persevere. Whereas the ungodly people, they are not able to persevere, and they're consumed by the difficulties of this life. Another illustration of this same lesson is found in the Gospels, where Jesus teaches that whoever hears his words and does them is like a man who builds his house on a rock. Now, what's the benefit of building one's house on the rock? Well, Jesus tells us, and a storm came, and the wind and the waves beat against that house, but it persevered because it was built on the rock. On the other hand, Jesus says, those who do not do my word are like men who build their houses on the sand. And what's wrong with building a house on the sand? Jesus says, and when the winds and the waves came, the house not being strongly founded, but being built on movable sand, the house had no foundation and was overcome by the wind and the waves and collapsed. Jesus gives this illustration to show us what comes of the godly who persevere and the ungodly, and he shows us that the cause of the perseverance of the godly is their obedience. Obedience is what enables them to persevere. Why? Because God gives grace to those who obey his commands. He gives grace to them so that they can obey his commands, and he gives grace to them when they do obey his commands. And it's God's grace, that grace which he gives to his people, which is symbolized by the streams of living water, the endless supply of strength that he gives his people when they obey him. He gives them this grace, and it's that grace that enables them to persevere through the adverse conditions, while those who do not have access to that grace, they simply dry up and are blown away like the chaff. They cannot endure the adverse conditions. And so when we seek to live obediently as Christians, it's no surprise that we find now and then that times of trial come, difficulties come. Sometimes the difficulties that arise in our lives seem incomprehensible, almost ridiculous. The scriptures talk about the experience of the godly, that they feel like they struggle and are always going through difficulties while the ungodly prosper. But it's a deceiving and short-lived prosperity. It's an appearance of prosperity. But because of the nature of this life and the fact that judgment awaits us after death, it doesn't matter what the circumstances of our lives are. All that matters is how we end. And this is why perseverance becomes the key for the godly. They simply persevere, and that's what matters most. So it's perseverance that brings them to a successful end, and this is ultimately what leads them to salvation, which is their mission, which is why all that they do shall prosper. Now, once we see that this lesson of perseverance is the key to the Christian life, we'll begin to see this theme in every passage of Scripture that we read. This lesson on perseverance really is the key to the Christian life. It's in fact symbolized most perfectly in the crucifixion. And if you pray the rosary and reflect on the mysteries of the rosary, you'll know that when we pray a decade and meditate on Christ carrying his cross, we pray in that mystery for the grace to bear our own crosses in this life. And what that means, to carry your cross, means to persevere, to continue carrying this load to the end. Christ wasn't, he wasn't snuck up on and quickly killed. He had to participate perseveringly in his passion. He was scourged. He was spit upon and beaten. He was dragged around from place to place. He was made to carry his own cross. And what we see in the Passion of Christ is not merely that he dies for other people, but that he perseveres under those adverse conditions. He perseveres, he is patient. He carries his own cross, and he teaches us to take up our own cross, to imitate him in that work of perseverance. And why is that so important? Why is it so important for Christians to be models of perseverance in difficult circumstances, it's because that perseverance can't be imitated. You can't fake true perseverance. Sure, you can fake it for a little while, and we hear all kinds of motivational speakers trying to rouse people up to overcome difficulties and fight through hard times. But when those waves of difficulty just keep coming and coming and coming, the ungodly cannot persevere. And the perseverance of the saints is what actually identifies those saints, which is why Jesus said, "He who endures to the end shall be saved." And that's not a challenge for us. It's not some sort of test, really, because he promises us the grace that we need to accomplish that perseverance. But we have to seek it through obedience, because God gives grace to the humble. He gives grace to those who are obedient. And the more obedient we are, the more grace we receive. The more grace we receive, the greater trials we can endure. The greater trials we endure, the more we glorify God. And you see this cycle, which is symbolized again in Psalm 1 by this tree being planted in adverse circumstances, but beside the stream of living water, so that in the presence of those circumstances, he continues to bear fruit and prosper. That's the image of the Christian life. And as a Christian, what I'd like to encourage other Christians to focus on is the fact that Christians win through perseverance. Christians win through perseverance. And I'd like you to really focus on this as a key principle in your life. Christians win through perseverance. We don't have to talk trash. We don't have to pound on our chests or yell and get attention. We don't have to try to imitate the world. We don't have to have all the bells and whistles and appearances of prosperity. We don't have to have that. We can overcome the world in solitude. We can overcome the world in silence and humility, because the world simply will not endure. Our opponents, those who fight and work against us, they won't endure. They can't endure. They are like the chaff which the wind drives away. We simply have to be patient and endure quietly in humility, and we'll win, because we have the grace that's needed to persevere. Last night I had a consultation phone call with a family, and as we were ending our discussion, they asked, how are you able to get so much done? Looking at the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, all the work that's been done, how are you able to get this done? And the answer is very simple. It's simply been conducted over a long period of time. I've been working on the Classical Liberal Arts Academy now as my full-time, and when I say full-time, I mean all of my time, minus sleep. I've been working on developing the Classical Liberal Arts Academy for 25 years, non-stop. And there have been endless trials and temptations and thorns in the flesh, like St. Paul says, and difficulties and enemies and oppositions and discouragements. But what's made it successful is that by the grace of God, I'm able to persevere and keep going and not lose hope and not become discouraged, not be depressed, not be overcome, but persevere through all the difficult times. And that's what begins to produce beautiful things after a long time. His fruit shall be born in due season. Not immediately, not at an inappropriate, premature time, but his fruit will be born in the end. All that he does shall prosper. And it's that perseverance that marks the work that I've done in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and I would attribute the success of the Academy entirely to perseverance alone. I don't have any extraordinary gifts. I don't have any extraordinary knowledge. I don't have an amazing academic background or intellectual gifts, although I'm sure I have some gifts in those areas. Nothing extraordinary. But the most important thing is simply that through the years, God has continually supplied me with hope and encouragement and provision to allow me to keep going and keep working and keep working. Good health, another thing, good health. People don't consider how important just being healthy is. That's not in my control. And it's these graces that are like the rivers flowing, always supplying the tree with what it needs, and it allows the work to be done over an extended period of time. We simply persevere and overcome, as if in a marathon. And to use the marathon as an illustration and compare it to the Christian life, I'm in decent shape as a 46-year-old man, and if I went and signed up for a marathon, I could stand next to a world-class marathon runner, and when that starting gun went off, I could take off and dust that world-class marathon runner. I could blow him away. Maybe for even 2 miles, I could blow him away. And you can imagine the appearance of that race. You can imagine the fans watching, the fans seeing me leading this world-class runner. You can imagine the fans taunting this world-class runner and him being scoffed at for being behind some old man, some 46-year-old man who doesn't even run marathons. But that marathon runner wouldn't care about the situation. The marathon runner wouldn't care what the fans said. He wouldn't care about that lead that I had on him after 2 miles, because he knows that there are very few people standing at that starting line who are going to run until the end of that marathon. He knows that. He knows there's very few that he has to worry about, maybe 4 or 5 that are at his level of fitness and endurance. All the rest are going to stop at some point or get injured or quit or start walking and slow down. And that small number of world-class marathoners, they're the ones who are going to run the full 26 miles. And that's how the Christian life works. The only people who can run the full 26 miles of the Christian life are those who, through obedience, have access to God's grace and continue to persevere until the end. It doesn't matter. There are all kinds of people who sprint out ahead of the Christians and show off for a little while, but they all crash and burn. They all quit. They're all blown away like chaff. And only the Christians can persevere to the end. Only the Christians can persevere through this marathon of life. And we have to know that. We have to know that only the obedient are going to last. Only the obedient are going to persevere. We may see others with an appearance of prosperity, or others who are disobeying, who claim that they are going to prosper and that the way we're living is stupid or outdated or ridiculous or fanatical, but they're not going to endure. And we've seen this story a million times. We've seen the temporarily prosperous worldling boasting about how superior his way is and mocking the life of the Christian. And then we see those people crash and burn. And we don't wish for them that they would crash and burn. We wish that they would be converted. But We can't allow this appearance of worldly prosperity of any kind, of any species, to distract us, just like that world-class marathoner can't let any comments from the crowd or other runners affect him when he knows that their judgment is not true and that only the best runners will persevere to the end. Only the obedient will make it to the end. Others may have a prosperity, but it's not the kind of prosperity that the godly man wants. It's not a lasting, permanent prosperity. It's a temporary pleasure, some temporary ambition, some vain glory, some honor that lasts for a time and isn't in a man's control anyway. And that's not what the godly man seeks. And so if we're seeking the things that we should be seeking, if we're delighting in the law of the Lord and meditating on his law day and night, we should be like the tree planted firmly beside the rivers of living water. Our leaf won't wither. We shall bear our fruit in due season, and everything we do as we obey God's will be prosperous. And the nature of this life is of a marathon, not of a sprint. This is what Aesop communicated in the fable of the tortoise and the hare. The hare is very impressive in all of its speed and agility, but the tortoise just kept moving on, humbly and quietly along the path, and in the end won the race. Because the quick starts and quick shifting and changes of the rabbit was not what leads to victory in a race of endurance. And the turtle, although it was slow and boring and had none of the attraction of the rabbit, won the race. This is the nature of the Christian life. And let me just talk about a few applications from my own experience. I've already given my experience in my academic work, but let me talk also an example from the lives of my children. When we were raising our kids, we chose to homeschool them because we believed it was a matter of obedience, that we raised them in the faith and under the influence of Christian culture and teaching. For us, it was a matter of obedience. We raised our kids at home, homeschooling them, and you can imagine that they fussed about that and gave us a hard time all through the years, because they looked around as we did things like study grammar and history and the scriptures and the catechism. We studied these subjects, these timeless, long, enduring subjects that take lots and lots of time and work. And we go through many seasons where it seems that very little progress is made. And we have long-term goals for our children's education. And we work, and it seems very boring, very dry, hard to imagine how you're going to use any of this stuff. And they look around at their peers, and they hear all kinds of stories about how they're doing this and playing this sport and studying this subject and that subject, and they're doing this and that, and they're in the band at school, and they're in this drama club, and they're here and they're there and they're here. And they hear what seems to be all kinds of excitement as their peers grow up through the years, especially in the younger years. And what I told my children was, this is all cute because they're in this artificial state-funded school environment that's like a bubble. And when these kids hit early adulthood, the day they receive their diploma, this artificial bubble, this snow globe that they live in, is going to burst. And suddenly, they're going to have to find footing in a world that they know nothing about. Whereas we're preparing you to live in that world even now, and to transition successfully into that world when you enter into young adulthood. So don't be deceived or distracted by the appearances of achievements of these kids around you, because they're artificial and unsustainable. And of course the kids didn't believe that. They just thought we were trying to make them do our will. But in time, our older children decided that they wanted to enter the military because they learned of all the benefits that our military offers, benefits of careers and education and discipline, on and on and on. All the benefits of military careers. And as the time came to get in touch with the recruiters and start making plans and testing, learning about the career opportunities open to them, they found that the recruiters couldn't say enough positively about the way that they were raised. And the recruiters explained to them that the military is actually struggling to find recruits. Though the military has all these resources, literally billions and billions of dollars of resources available, they can't find recruits because these kids growing up in modern society, in these modern schools, are unhealthy, they're weak, they have all kinds of bad habits, they're already using drugs, they already have criminal records, on and on and on. And so it's not that my kids had to outperform these rabbits racing all over the place. My kids simply had to endure, because character issues take down their peers one by one. And by the time they reach young adulthood, there aren't many kids left standing who haven't already been spoiled by bad habits or character issues or criminal records or drug use or whatever other vice comes along. So my kids got a chance to learn this lesson and see it in real life, that the way that we prosper is not by beating unbelievers at their own game, not by trying to outrace them and outperform them and outdo them and multiply activity. It's simply by persevering in virtue, because life, this life, with all of its temptations and trials, takes everyone out one by one. And when we finally come to the finish line, we find that there are very few still standing. And you simply need to persevere. You simply need to outlast your peers in a world where the conditions are adverse and they wear down other people who don't have the right foundation, who don't have access to grace, or who don't have the benefits of relationships with people who have grace. And what appears to be the opposition or the competition of one's peers in the world simply turns out to be a mirage. And when the time comes to actually step forward and begin claiming the benefits that are available, those benefits are left for those who persevere in simplicity of life, in good health, in good habits, in good family life, in Christian morals, and so on. And those benefits are there for the taking. And my kids learned that by their experience, and through a number of experiences like that, began to see that the message that their peers are fed throughout their school years are contradicted by the people actually in the adult world running the businesses and running the universities and running the religious communities, running the military organizations. The message of the adult community is almost the opposite of the message in the school communities. And so we learned, and my kids understand, that the way to succeed in life is not that you have to actually outperform everyone. You simply have to outlast everyone, because sin is going to take other people down. And they're simply going to be removed from the race by their own lack of strength, their own inability to persevere. And so the question ultimately comes down to who is going to be left standing. And in God's providence, we have the opportunity through our life experiences at different points of time in our lives to experience that lesson, to experience it in short-term examples that teach us the long-term, the ultimate reality, that it's by perseverance that we'll be saved. We have to endure to the end to be saved. And therefore, one of the key concepts that we always need to focus on is sustainability. Sustainability is the key to perseverance. Everything that we do has to be sustainable to fulfill the nature of the activity itself, to fulfill the duration of the contest that we're engaged in. It has to be sustainable. So many people can say, oh, I like to do this, or I'm going to do this, or I want to do this. But the question is whether or not it's actually sustainable. Whether you're going to be able to do that to the end. Because if you stop short, you lose. And it doesn't matter how impressive that brief run was, you failed to finish. And so in a life that's crowned in perseverance, sustainability is essential, and that's what wisdom ultimately comes down to. Wisdom is understanding how to live sustainably in a life that demands perseverance. That's what wisdom is. And there are a million applications of this principle in our lives. The disagreement of opinions of men, there are as many opinions as there are individual men, but the difference that separates the good opinions from the bad opinions is sustainability. So in modern education, for example, we'll hear things like, well, I have a different learning style. Well, that sounds really cute, but I don't know if it's sustainable. And if it's not sustainable, you're not going to succeed. And it doesn't matter what you say, you're going to burn out and stop before the finish line. And so the key is sustainability. That's wisdom. We see this all through our lives today in modern society. So many amazing new technological breakthroughs and advances and developments that have no regard for sustainability. They cause all kinds of hoopla when they're revealed. And then after a while we start to realize, wait a minute. This has all kinds of negative side effects. This has all kinds of costs that we didn't anticipate. This is not sustainable. And the next thing we know, it's gone. And the world is just on to the next press release, on to the next breakthrough, on to the next development. And we have to ask the question, what's actually sustainable in life? And there's only one answer. The only thing that's sustainable in this life is God's will. The prophets taught that there is no counsel against the Lord. God's will, God's way, His commandments, the way of life He teaches us is a life that's sustainable and persevering. And we know it's sustainable because He is the source of that sustainability. He Himself is the one who gives grace to those who walk according to His will, and He ensures that they are able to persevere. So all of this brings us back to Psalm 1, which is what I wanted to talk about today. And I encourage you to spend your time reading Psalm 1, reciting Psalm 1, memorize Psalm 1, because in it is the real key to the Christian life. I hope that's helpful. God bless.